In the early years of the Tang dynasty, immense suffering swept across China. Severe droughts baked the soil, while massive swarms of locusts destroyed crops. Entire villages fled their homes, eating anything they could find just to survive the famine. During this physical devastation, the spiritual relief offered by Buddhism was also failing. Since the teachings had arrived in China, the translated text had become severely fractured. The original data, the precise instructions for spiritual liberation, was trapped in poor translations, leading to bitter divisions and confusion among the monks trying to guide a desperate population. A young monk named Xuanzang recognized that studying these broken copies would never yield the truth. He had to bypass the Chinese translations entirely. He needed to travel thousands of miles west to the Buddha land of Tianzhu, ancient India, to retrieve the primary source texts, specifically the Yogacara Bhumi Shastra. There was one massive barrier in his way. The emperor had issued a strict border closure decree to maintain military defense. Leaving the empire without official permission was a severe crime, and sneaking across the border was punishable by death. Xuanzang's quest for data fidelity forced a horrific choice. He could stay in Chang'an and watch his people struggle without clear guidance, or he could risk execution by defying the emperor to find the original texts. He chose to walk. Journeying for weeks alongside starving refugees, Xuanzang arrived at the western border post of Liangzhou. The environment here was desolate, hostile, and thick with paranoia. It didn't take long for the authorities to notice him. The border commander, Li Daliang, issued a direct threat. Xuanzang's religious intentions did not matter. He must turn back to the capital immediately, or face a year in prison and likely execution for attempting to sneak out. Faced with certain arrest, Xuanzang made a radical decision. Using the chaotic movement of famine refugees as cover, he slipped past the heavily guarded checkpoints in the dead of night, officially making himself a wanted fugitive of the state. When offered the chance to turn back, his response was absolute. He stated that having come west to seek the Dharma, he refused to take a single step east back toward safety, even if he died on the road. By choosing the path of an outlaw, Xuanzang accepted that fulfilling his religious vow was more important than obeying the laws of any earthly empire. The geography ahead was designed to be lethal. To leave Chinese territory, he had to navigate around 5 massive military beacon towers. They were spaced out over miles of barren land, and the soldiers guarded the only available water sources day and night. Once past the towers, the real horror began: the Moheyan Desert. This 800-li stretch of endless sand and blistering winds was completely devoid of life. History warned that 9 out of 10 merchant caravans that entered this wasteland never made it out. He faced this expanse entirely alone. Early on, he had dismissed his only guide, a repentant bandit named Shi Pantuo, to ensure the man wouldn't be executed for helping a fugitive. The desert immediately began to dismantle his mind. Trudging through the sand without water, Xuanzang was tormented by mirages. His writings describe invisible demons, hallucinations born of severe dehydration and isolation, actively stalking him, trying to break his resolve. Enduring this physical and psychological torture was the price of admission. Xuanzang was paying in blood and sanity for the chance to acquire uncorrupted truth. Emerging barely alive from the wastes, the environment shifted dramatically. He arrived in Gaochang, a heavily armed, vastly wealthy oasis kingdom that controlled the trade routes of the western regions. The king of Gaochang was deeply devoted to Buddhism and recognized Xuanzang's immense value. He offered a choice: stay in Gaochang forever as the kingdom's supreme spiritual leader, or be deported straight back to Chang'an, where the executioner's blade waited. Xuanzang countered with a hunger strike. He sat down and refused to eat or drink, choosing to slowly starve himself to death in the king's palace rather than abandon his journey. The king eventually relented, terrified of bearing the karmic sin of killing a holy man. Xuanzang's willingness to starve rather than settle in a palace made his priority clear. His heart remained with the suffering people back in Tang. 4 grueling years after slipping out of Chang'an, he finally arrived at the sanctuary in his heart, Nalanda Monastery in India. the greatest center of learning in the ancient world. Here, his intellectual ascension was rapid. Over 5 years of intense study, he learned the regional languages, studied logic and grammar, and mastered the exact primary source texts he had nearly died to find. His mastery caught the attention of King Chiladitya, the ruler of the most powerful empire in India. The king convened a massive open debate, gathering rulers of 18 different countries and thousands of scholars to test this monk from the East. The core conflict of this assembly was philosophical. Xuanzang was tasked by his masters to publicly defend the tenets of Mahayana Buddhism against the heavy critiques of the opposing Hinayana school. The 18-day assembly served as the final validation for the exact philosophy that kept him alive in the desert. Hinayana Buddhism is an inward-facing philosophy. The primary goal is personal liberation, navigating the maze to achieve self-salvation. Mahayana Buddhism demands something else. Once a practitioner finds the exit, they turn back, focusing on the salvation of all sentient beings. Xuanzang utterly dominated the 18-day open debate. The Indian kings were so astounded by his brilliance that they begged him to stay safely in the Buddha land, where he would be revered and protected for the rest of his life. But staying would violate the very Mahayana vow he had just defended. He packed up the translated scriptures, turned his back on absolute safety once again, and willingly chose to brave the lethal journey all over again to bring the data home. Xuanzang spent 17 years in the harshest environments on Earth for one purpose: to ensure the truth he found in India reached the people who needed it in China.